All right, what's going on, everyone? So today we're going to jump into some updates around the ongoing war in Gaza. There's a lot to get into, so I'm glad you're here. Haven't said that in a while, but it's true. It means a lot that this is one of the places you choose to come to learn more about the ongoing wars and conflicts around the world. It's a lot to keep up with. So today we're going to talk about an Israeli strike that killed family members of the Hamas leader Ismael Haniyeh, some updates on the ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas, some updated messaging, if you will, from Israel around the war, and then a possible Iranian retaliation following a significant Israeli strike in Syria a little over a week ago. So starting with the strike that was in Gaza that killed some of Haniyeh's family members. Haniyeh is not currently in Gaza, right? He still has family members there, but he is based out of Qatar. In an interview with Al Jazeera Arabic, Haniyeh confirmed the killing of his children Hazem, Amir, and Mohammed, along with a number of his grandchildren on Wednesday. There's reporting that at least 3 grandchildren of Haniyeh were also killed in the attack. More on that in a second. It sounds like that's one of the aspects here being confirmed by Al Jazeera, and Haniyeh not yet been confirmed by Israel. Take that for what it's worth. Some statements from Haniyeh here. He said, quote, "There is no doubt that this criminal enemy is driven by the spirit of revenge and the spirit of murder and bloodshed, and it does not observe any standards or laws. We've seen it violate everything on the land of Gaza. There is a war of ethnic cleansing and genocide. There is mass displacement." Continuing, "If they think they are targeting my children at the peak of these talks before the movement or Hamas's response is submitted will cause Hamas to change its positions, they are delusional." And that's tied into the ongoing ceasefire negotiations between the two parties. And wrapping up, he said, "The blood of my children is not more valuable than the blood of the children of the Palestinian people. All the martyrs of Palestine are my children." Now, Israel put out a statement alongside this that confirms many of the aspects we'll go right into here. The IDF and Shin Bet confirmed that they killed 3 sons of Hamas leader Ismael Haniyeh in a strike in Gaza City's Shadi camp earlier today. This was an announcement that came out last night, so on Wednesday, saying that those 3 were operatives in Hamas, working in the Hamas, the military aspect of Hamas. According to the IDF and Shin Bet, Amir Haniyeh was a squad commander in the Hamas military wing, while Hazem and Mohammed Haniyeh were lower-ranking operatives also in the Hamas military wing. A military source said the IDF is aware of reports that additional members of the Haniyeh family, including a minor, were hit in the strike. Hamas's media said that 2 of Haniyeh's grandchildren were killed and a 3rd was wounded. So the only kind of conflicting piece there is Israel saying they are aware that there may have been others wounded or killed in the strike that were minors, whereas Haniyeh and Al Jazeera saying that they were. I haven't seen pictures or images from that strike, so the actual battle damage assessment, no definitive proof from the blast site, if you will. So we'll have to wait for more information to confirm the exact details of that strike. Now, depending on your stance here, how this is kind of playing out, this specific strike is either something that folks could rally around or something to be absolutely terrified of. What I mean here is Haniyeh is saying rather coldly, in a sense. I think a lot of us watching this from around the world see his reaction to his children and maybe even his grandchildren being killed, and he's very cold. Just, yes, that happens. It's tragic, but they're no different than all the other Palestinians. You can see how folks might rally around that and say it's time to continue the fight. We're not giving up. Look, even our leader is losing family members. And he said, I missed the stat here, but I want to say that he said at least 60 members of his family have so far been killed. So this isn't the first time. That would be extended family. These are his children. So you can see how that could be a rallying cry for some to continue the fight and continue the resistance. On the other side, I think it's easy to see how this is something to be concerned about if you're on the Israeli side. And this is something we dealt with a lot in counterterrorism operations throughout the Middle East, where you would see how willing some of these organizations and these people are to sacrifice themselves and or their families. That's a very challenging adversary. I think it lends a little bit of credibility to the idea that Hamas is far from eliminated at this point. It's an ideology, and it's a strong one. If the leader of the organization is willing to lay down his family members, what does this look like going forward, right? There's still clearly a lot of fight left in Hamas. Now, all of this ties into the ongoing ceasefire negotiations, which never really stopped. They've been continuing for a long time. There's been a few times where it seems like an agreement is going to be reached and it kind of falls through. Right now, it does sound like there's a lot of international pressure to reach some sort of agreement. And a lot of that is coming from the United States and elsewhere. But something to keep in mind as we talk about in this video and future videos about any sort of ceasefire negotiation is that when you're looking at something like this, both sides have to have something they can say is a victory. Both sides need a win. You're going to be very hard pressed throughout history, and until you go to, unconditional surrender of, say, World War II, any conflict that ends with some sort of negotiated settlement, you'll find both sides have something they can cling to that they can at least show their supporters or a portion of their supporters, hey, look, we didn't just quit. Hey, look, we weren't just totally defeated. We, extracted this out of the adversary. So keep that in mind when you hear anything about these negotiations. What we have right now, and we'll come back to that here in a second, what we have right now is that Hamas rejected an Israeli ceasefire proposal made at the talks in Cairo. This is according to a Hamas official. And then Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as this news came out, said that they had set a date for the Rafah operation, which is kind of a way of saying the ceasefire talks aren't progressing. There's no clear end in sight there, so we're going to continue pressing the military operation into Rafah. Rafah is the southernmost city in Gaza, the last kind of holdout, if you will, of a couple key demographics. It's likely that a lot of Hamas militants have moved into Rafah that were not directly engaging Israeli forces throughout the rest of the Gaza Strip. And it's definite that a lot of Palestinian civilians have moved into Rafah. It's just kind of the last remaining area that the IDF has not conducted major ground operations into. So Netanyahu saying that a date is set for Rafah is kind of a poke in the eye of the United States and some other international partners who are really trying, it seems like, to get Israel to not do that or not go into Rafah in the same way that they went into Khan Yunis, Gaza City, and other portions of the Gaza Strip, mostly due to the fact that there's so many civilians there, and conducting the same type of operation into Rafah would result in likely a significant number of civilian casualties. So what we're seeing right now is, now a note on the Rafah date. I saw something where the U.S. thinks that Netanyahu is bluffing, that he doesn't actually have a date set. Think about that for a second, just how far U.S.-Israeli relations have shifted in recent weeks, maybe even months. For the U.S. to call that out, and it was a leak, I think it was an unnamed official, but for that to make it to the press, somebody wanted that to make it to the press. I'm not sure how important that is. Whether or not Netanyahu has an exact date set or not, I'm almost certain that the planning is being conducted, has been conducted. The resources are being allocated for an operation in Rafah. Whether or not there's an actual date set, I feel like is just kind of the messaging there. It would be very, very surprising if Israel is not making preparations for that operation pending the outcome of these negotiations. Now, what we're seeing right now from the negotiations is both sides saying that there's no change in what the other side is presenting. So kind of the hard lines that have been drawn in the sand that are really incompatible, if you will. So Israel saying, just to kind of rehash this, Israel is saying that Hamas will no longer exist, will no longer be a governing entity in Gaza. They will release all of the hostages. And then you have Hamas saying that Israel will leave the Gaza Strip entirely and I guess they haven't said this directly, but strongly hinted that Hamas will continue to play a critical role in Gaza. So you can see how it seems very difficult for those two things to come together at this point. Now, Egyptian security services that are helping with some of these talks, and I think this most recent round of negotiations is actually happening in Cairo, they said that some progress had been made. They said both sides had made concessions that could lead to a deal for a 3-stage truce with the release of any remaining Israeli hostages and a long-term ceasefire addressed in the second stage. So again, when you're looking at this ceasefire, think of both sides need a win. Both sides need to project that they have the upper hand in these negotiations. And publicly so far, both have said that they're not giving an inch. Now, whether that's the exact same that's happening at the negotiating table, we'll wait and see. Now, one of the major sticking points here that's starting to come out through a little bit of reporting, this is according to a senior Hamas official who said that Hamas did not have 40 living hostages in Gaza who met the criteria for an exchange under a proposed ceasefire agreement with Israel being negotiated. That's a problem. So right now, there's believed to be around 130 hostages remaining in Gaza. Israeli intelligence has said that at least 30 of those have likely died in captivity. So even take that number and say there's 100 hostages remaining in Gaza. Hamas now saying that they don't have 40 living Israeli hostages that meet the criteria for this release. Now, Hamas has stayed away from wanting to release soldiers, military-aged men and women, and have instead, through past releases, focused on the elderly and children, or anybody with some sort of illness that might need additional treatment. So I don't know that I would read this entirely as there aren't 40 total hostages still alive, but it's a big issue if that many of the hostages have died in captivity. If there's not very many remaining hostages still alive, I would expect Israel, that Rafah operation is going to kick off soon. If that is the facts on the ground, that the majority of the hostages are now dead and have died in Hamas captivity, it's very hard to see a scenario where Israel doesn't just go pedal to the metal, straight into Rafah, all out to try to, once and for all, eliminate Hamas as best they can. So something to keep an eye on there. Again, kind of a leak at this point in terms of maybe not having 40 living hostages remaining, which would be awful and tragic that many people died in captivity. We'll wait for more information to come out on that front. Now, on the messaging front, a noticeable change from Israel in the past couple days is a focus on talking about just how many aid trucks they have moved into Gaza as of late. It's hard to ignore the fact that this comes just a couple days after the Israeli strike against the World Central Kitchen, where 7 international aid workers were killed, caused a whole international uproar. And then shortly thereafter, they're still putting out information about military operations because they're still taking place, not just in Gaza, but also in southern Lebanon against Hezbollah. But then one of their major press releases just yesterday was all about aid. Israel said since the beginning of the war, over 22,000 trucks containing over 400,000 tons of humanitarian aid have passed through border crossings to the Gaza Strip. In addition, approximately 3,961 food packages have been airdropped in 64 airdrops to distribution points across the Gaza Strip. As part of the humanitarian effort, yesterday, Wednesday, 298 humanitarian aid trucks entered through the crossings and 353 food packages were airdropped. They say, furthermore, yesterday, the Coordination and Liaison Administration for the Gaza Strip, together with the IDF Southern Command, coordinated the entry of 28 trucks carrying humanitarian aid to the northern Gaza Strip. They say the IDF will continue its efforts to facilitate the entry of humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip by land, air, and sea in accordance with international law. Again, this has been a part of Israeli messaging from day one. Very early on, they were talking about the aid getting in and what they were doing to protect Palestinian civilians. So it's not like this is new, but it's a noticeable uptick in recent days. Whether this is tied to, again, just trying to consider the full context here, whether this is tied to the World Central Kitchen strike of last week, to ongoing negotiations with Hamas around a ceasefire or something, or international pressure around the ongoing war. Whatever it is, it's all connected in some way, shape, or form, and notable. So I wanted to bring that up. Another aspect to consider when looking at this whole ceasefire negotiation right now is the Israeli withdrawal of troops from the Gaza Strip. And we talked about this in a previous video, where at their peak, I believe Israel had around 23 brigades in Gaza, right at the early days of the ground invasion. That has steadily declined over time. And they're down now to 2, maybe 3, right in the central portion of the Gaza Strip. And there's, again, trying to consider the full context, there's a couple different reasons to think about this here. One is that they just don't need as many for the police-type action that they're trying to conduct in central and northern Gaza. They would still need a significant military presence, even for counterterrorism-style raids into the Rafah Strip. You need a significant presence for all of the additional resources to carry that out. So that's not a platoon going down there. You're going to have significant military assets in that region. But there's one area where I think there could be some truth here, and the other that I don't think plays in as much. One is the threat on the northern border with Hezbollah. Tensions there continue to mount. It's nothing new. There's a lot of press from inside of Israel that saying that the citizens there view a war with Hezbollah as inevitable, although not necessarily in the very near future. So it's entirely possible that Israel is preparing maybe for an offensive operation, or maybe there's some intelligence that Hezbollah is going to try to kick something off. So repositioning troops out of Gaza two areas where they could be quickly rotated north or maybe being pre-positioned north. I think there's real possibility there. I've also heard the argument that this is due to the likely Iran retaliation for an Israeli strike in Syria a couple days ago. I think it's less likely there, whatever Iran decides to respond with, and they will. I'd be very shocked if Iran does nothing in response to that Israeli strike, and we'll kind of rehash that here in a second. That's likely not going to play a major role with Israeli infantry and armor and engineering assets on the ground. So moving combat troops out of Gaza ahead of some sort of Iranian attack doesn't necessarily match one for one. So looking back about a week ago, Israeli planes, again, Israel hasn't, as far as I'm seeing, they haven't confirmed this, but everything points to Israel doing this. They bombed an Iranian consulate in Syria last Monday in a strike that Iran said killed 7 of its military advisors, including 3 senior commanders. The Iranian IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, said in a statement that Mohammad Reza Zahedi, a senior commander in the Quds Force, was one of those killed. He was likely the one targeted. This is the most senior member of the IRGC and of the Quds Force killed really since Qasem Soleimani was killed by a U.S. drone strike a few years ago in Baghdad. So in a speech just a couple days ago, the Iranian leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei said, quote, "When they attack our consulate, it is as if they have attacked our soil. The malicious regime made a mistake on this matter, and it must be punished and will be punished." So what Iran's kind of hinting at here is they're viewing that attack on their consulate as Israel might as well struck Iranian territory. And the response is going to be in kind, which is kind of hinting at, again, they are going to strike Israeli territory. Now, a big question here remains, is it going to be Iran carrying out that strike? Or is it going to be one of their proxy forces in the region, which it's kind of a mixed bag. The proxy forces have certainly carried the brunt of the attacks in recent years. But if you look back again to when Soleimani was killed, which is of this magnitude, the Iranian response there was that Iran, the Iranian military, launched missiles and rockets at U.S. forces in Iraq. I think it's notable that no Americans, I believe, were killed in that strike. There were a handful wounded, but that was a direct Iranian attack against U.S. forces. They wanted to show that they were carrying out the response. No muddying of the waters of Kataib Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, anything like that. It was Iran. It sounds like that's what we can expect here as well. The Israeli foreign minister responded to this threat by saying that if Iran attacks from its own territory, Israel will respond in kind and attack in Iran. So I want to be careful with how I present this, and there's a reason I left this for the end of the video. This is the kind of thing that can quickly lead to fear-mongering, but there's also a fine line there between appreciating the threat and recognizing the danger that this presents and then just trying to drive clicks and spread fear because why not? So it's significant. There's no doubt. This could be a major turning point in this conflict. A lot right now depends on how Iran is going to react, and you can see him going a lot of different directions. This was, again, a significant Israeli strike carried out against an Iranian consulate in Syria, killing senior Iranian government officials, really. So we'll see. But it's definitely something to keep an eye on in the coming days. I've seen for more than a week now the speculation of what's going to be hit and where it's going to be hit. But personal opinion, I would expect an attack that is directly attributable to Iran to be carried out against Israel or Israeli interests. Maybe it's going to strike Israeli targets somewhere else in the Middle East. I think Iran's not stupid. They recognize that a strike into Israeli territory is going to be met with missile or airstrikes into Iranian territory, and that can quickly spiral. But we'll see. Again, this is the most escalatory event we've seen in this war in quite a while. That's all I got for now. Of course, if interested in this or other national security subjects, be sure to check out our Substack, linked in the description below. We just renamed it last week, 2 weeks ago, to Between the Lines with Preston Stewart. And the reason for that is that we're bringing in a lot of experts and analysts and researchers to write their own pieces and get their voice out there around a lot of these subjects. So I still am contributing. It's 3 to 4 articles coming out every week, and I'm still a big part of that. The videos are going up there as well. But we wanted to be able to give voice to some of these other incredibly smart analysts on a lot of subjects that I'm far from an expert in. Things like ISKP in Afghanistan and how they're dealing with Russia right now, China their actions in the South China Sea, looking at a lot of conflicts in Africa, the cartels in Mexico, and quite a bit more. Again, if interested, that is linked in the description below. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.